I'm going to help you discover something about yourself. You're not going to like it. You don't really want fair elections. Am I right? We're going to do a thought experiment to find out. We're in the future. The candidate that you support just won the race for president of the United States. You're thrilled. Then you receive information, reliable information, that your candidate cheated, actually broke the law to win. Only you have this information. If you make it public, your candidate will lose. Who here is going public with information that is going to cause your candidate for the president of the United States to lose? Show of hands. Right. Most of us are not going to, because our focus is on winning, losing, not fair elections. Now, here's a shocker for you. The people who wrote US election laws felt the same way. They didn't want fair elections either. I checked in with Tracy Campbell about this. He's a Pulitzer Prize nominee teaching history at the University of Kentucky. He says in his research, he found most election laws and regulations were established with specific partisan advantages in mind. Whether racial laws, gerrymandering, it's a case of the players serving as their own referees. Perfect example, Brian Kemp, governor in Georgia now. Katie Hobbs, governor in Arizona now. They both ran for governor. They both oversaw their own election. No surprise, they both won. That's legal. I asked Pippa Norris, the Harvard-based director of the Electoral Integrity Project, if this is a problem. She said, pure conflict of interest. And do other democracies run their elections this way? By and large, no. Professor Norris said in established democracies like Norway and Germany, there are normally national and regional election commissions. So, we are doing it wrong. We've structured our elections incorrectly from the beginning, and naturally, we're having some very serious problems. I want to tell you about the Mario Cuomo Bridge in New York. It was covered by the Albany Times-Union. According to whistleblower James McNall, a former safety manager on the project, the almost $4 billion bridge was constructed with faulty bolts. Ahmad Atani, a leading expert on bridge construction, called the bolt failures unprecedented and alarming, saying, if the joints fail, the bridge will collapse. That's a metaphor for our democracy. Something important built on an unstable foundation. So now what do? Well, let's start by talking about it. We're not supposed to talk about problems with our elections because it will discourage people from voting. Well, newsflash, people are discouraged from voting. In 2020, the US had its highest voter turnout in 40 years, and do you know what it was? It was 67%. Do you know who else has 67% turnout? The Republic of the Congo, a country that's been devastated by civil war for decades. Do you know who has over 80% turnout? Ecuador, Argentina, Seychelles, an island nation off the east coast of Africa. So we can do better. We're not going to improve US elections by pretending they're perfect and sweeping problems under the rug. That's what got us here. Also, second newsflash, Americans are well aware there's a problem. According to an NPR Ipsos poll, 7 in 10 Americans say the country is in crisis, at risk of failing. So we know there's a problem. But how we each individually understand that problem depends on our political belief system. Many people know former President, Republican Donald Trump, refused to concede he lost his 2020 bid for the White House. But in 2018, Stacey Abrams refused to concede she lost her bid to be governor of Georgia. Abrams had the misfortune of running against Brian Kemp. Remember, he oversaw his own election to become Georgia's governor. Abrams said we had a system that he managed, that he manipulated. And top Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, Vice President Kamala Harris, supported Abrams' claim that Kemp stole the election through a series of voter purges. On the other side, 2/3 of Republicans agree with Trump that there was fraud in the 2020 election. So, we have two prominent candidates, leaders in their party. Both believe the elections are rigged, and both are staunchly supported by their followers. And this image of Trump and Abrams, this is the image of our political polarization. And it feels set in stone, permanent, even dangerous. In a society disrupted weekly, sometimes daily, by mass shootings, the prospect of inflamed, armed protests spiraling into unrest and violence after a major election is not hypothetical. We've already witnessed it. Let's take a step back and get a quick sense of the issues. Former President Trump says the elections are unfair because, 1, he thinks the voting machines are rigged, and 2, he says people are voting that are not legally allowed to vote. We can address that with more transparency. Stacey Abrams says the elections are unfair because voter suppression tactics are being used to prevent legitimate voters from participating. We can address that with more inclusion. We need transparency and inclusion. Right? But how? How do we get there? Best-selling author Michael Lewis has a podcast. He explores what's happened with fairness in American life. He has a term for what we need. He calls it the neutral. Someone who's even-handed and makes decisions that most people agree are fair. Ideally, we want neutral elections, the type that Pippa Norris says are normal in established democracies. But we've already discovered that US elections are not run by neutral election officials. They're run by partisan election officials following rules created by partisan legislators. And sometimes those rules are not even being followed, as our organization Smart Elections found when we observed an audit. Remember, the rules are set up for winning, losing, not fair elections. So, in the midst of extreme political polarization on an uneven playing field, how do we increase both transparency and inclusion and get to fair elections? Let's do another thought experiment. We'll attempt to relax political polarization. I'm going to list problems with our elections. Some are conservative talking points, some are progressive. Whatever team you normally side with in this experiment, identify and empathize with the other side. Fun, right? If you don't usually pay attention to this stuff, or you're an independent, or you're not old enough to vote, just pick a team. You know which side you lean. Got it? Okay, here we go. Starting with the Democrats. Try to positively identify with these statements. Everything I'm saying is true. Voting machines. Voting machines are not perfect. They're not transparent. Voting machines are computers, and only the people who program them know how they count votes. Voting machines have been documented, counting races incorrectly in Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Democrats? How was that? Okay. Great. Republicans, your turn. Try to positively identify with these statements. Everything I'm saying is true. Voter suppression is alive and well in US elections. In 2020, some voters in Georgia stood in line for 10 hours to vote. Research from MIT shows that voters of color on average wait twice as long as other voters. Overly strict voter ID laws and decreasing the days and times that polls are open have the effect of decreasing the number of people who get to vote. And many people believe these are intentional techniques to keep people of color from voting. Republicans? How is that? You okay? Great. We've relaxed political polarization a little. Now, we want to level the playing field with neutral oversight. To do that, we can participate in something called nonpartisan election observation. Instead of simply rooting for our candidate, we can help assess whether the process is fair for everyone. Observers might check wait times, accessibility, the count on voting machines. Leading organizations like the Carter Center have begun nonpartisan observation of US elections, and other pro-democracy groups have programs as well. Our elections allow for partisan advantage, and it creates an environment of mistrust. To overcome this, we want to relax political polarization and engage in more neutral oversight. That will increase transparency and inclusion and help us achieve our goal, fair elections. We're going to do one more thought experiment. Imagine, in the next election, everyone you know who's eligible votes. And imagine everyone you speak with after the election agrees it was fair. Imagine this helps us make better decisions together more easily. Let's do it. Let's make that vision a reality.